Hello everyone, this is Peter Svidler with the highlights video of Game 7 of the World Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano-Caruana. After the rest day, Magnus was once again playing the white pieces due to the change of the order that happens midway through every World Championship match in recent years. And the main question of the day, of course, before the game started was what will Magnus opt to do on move 1? Because up to that point, 1 d4 was played in game 2, 1 c4 was played in game 4, and 1 e4 in game 6. Frankly, all three resulted in nothing at all out of the opening for Magnus, although game 6 turned out to be extremely exciting, which you cannot really say about games 2 and 4. And my money, frankly, was on the repetition of 1 e4, but Magnus decides to play 1 d4, going sort of full circle and returning to what he started with in his first white game of the match. And Fabiano once again goes knight f6, knight f3, d5, c4, e6, knight c3. And here, of all the multiple options that Black has at his disposal, which is Rogozin with bishop b4, or arguably maybe even the Vienna with d takes c4, Fabiano continues playing what he played in game 2, which is bishop e7, allowing the Queen's Gambit declined sort of main lines. And Magnus also sticks to his guns and goes for e3, not avoiding the mainline theory. c5 is Fabiano's weapon of choice for this match, obviously. dc5, bc5, bishop takes c5, queen c2, knight c6, a3, queen a5. This is still following, obviously, very mainline theory, and also what happened in game 2. And in game 2, Magnus made the move rook d1, which is probably the most popular move in this position currently, and was very surprised by the move rook d8, which Fabiano played in reply. And after a very long think, decided not to get involved with the tactics, which most likely will arise after knight d2, played bishop e2, and the game was a very quiet draw. Today, after queen a5, Magnus more or less blitzed out knight d2, and here, probably considering what happened in the game, it makes sense to introduce the viewers to the theory of this variation, because it's actually kind of relevant if we try to describe what is currently happening in this line and what the sides are aiming for. After knight d2, Black has two main options. One is bishop b4, after which, somewhat surprisingly, because during the live show I said, of course, white just goes rook c1, but the endgame after takes, and d5 is quite sharp and seemingly is considered to be very playable for Black. Being an absolute bishop, I'm the world's biggest two bishops advantage fan. I would probably pick white here, but once again, theory seems to suggest Black is just fine here, in particular if you consider that in games between top players, this is almost non-existent these days. After bishop b4, everybody takes on d5, and here there was a number of games between Topalov and Kramnik, but those are old games. Kramnik took on d5 both with the pawn and with the knight, and in probably the most interesting recent game in this line, Hikaru took with the pawn here, and instead of, for instance, bishop d3, which in a very interesting game between Topalov and Kramnik in Monaco 2001, which went d4, castles, bishop takes c3, knight c4, queen h5, b takes c3, knight d5, and here Veselin played bishop g3, d3, and rook e1, hoping to create as much immediate pressure as possible on the Black position, and eventually won a complicated endgame. But instead of all that, Veselin in a rapid tournament in Paris in 2017 played knight b3 against Hikaru Nakamura. Hikaru took, bc, queen d8, bishop e2, knight e4, and here Veselin went for f3, knight f6, and a very striking looking move g2, g4, which is not, I mean, it is a preparation for potential attack later in the game, but also I think more importantly, black wants to play knight h5 here, trading this bishop off, and by playing g4, white more or less secures the f4 square for the bishop. And the game continued: bishop e6, castles, rook c8, queen d2, queen e7, a4, knight d7, a5, and Veselin in that game was at some point completely winning, but managed to misplay it quite badly in what we can only assume was very, very severe time trouble, and ended up even losing. And the second move after knight d2, which is very popular and has a ton of practice connected with it, is the move bishop e7. And here, I'm sorry, white has, of course, the option of playing knight b3, but the more popular move in this position is bishop g3, which looks slightly weird, but the point of that move is that black, after having sidestepped the immediate threat, after knight d2, of course, white is threatening to just pick up the bishop on c5 with knight b3, queen b6, knight a4. So black goes bishop e7, this is no longer a threat, and now black wants to play e5 followed by d4. So by playing bishop g3, white very adequately sidesteps this idea and makes sure that black cannot have any immediate counterplay in the center, and the games normally continue something along the lines of bishop d7, bishop e2, and here the most popular move is rook fc8, followed by castles, queen d8, finally evacuating this queen away from danger. And white tried a number of moves in this position. Queen d3 was briefly popular, but in recent years, Timur Rajabov and even more recently Pintala Harikrishna played b2 before here, and both of them won their games. I'm not sure if this position is actually much better for white, but it clearly is something that I think Magnus would quite enjoy, because white seems to have a reasonably stable advantage with absolutely zero risk attached. But in the game after knight d2, which once again you have to remember was the first deviation from game 2, black played queen d8 more or less instantly, and it's an exceedingly rare move. I was very surprised when preparing this video to learn just how rare it was, because the chat during the live broadcast was telling us this is well, almost a novelty in today's terms. I mean, the move obviously has been made before, but very rarely. But I still was not prepared to find a reasonably obvious move like this to have been only played, I think, 18 times in the database I have access to in this office, and it's a fairly decent database. So 18 games is pretty much nothing. And obviously, you know, you can cue the jokes about knight f3, queen a5, knight d2, and everybody goes home, but this was never going to be something Magnus does here. He played knight b3, which is quite logical. And the move Fabiano made here is more or less a complete novelty. Even those 18 games, I believe, do not feature the move bishop b6. But this is very logical from black, because if you play bishop e7, white can play rook d1, for instance, and there is a decent amount of pressure on this pawn on d5, and in particular this x-ray white has going along the d file is quite unpleasant for black, because the queen on d8 really has no good squares. And in comparison, if after bishop b6 you play rook d1, which was still something we expected from Magnus because it looked very logical, black has a very nice square for the queen on e7. And I think this is the most important difference between those two lines. The fact that black left the e7 square available for the queen. And I did some clicking around after bishop b6. Magnus ended up playing somewhat strikingly in game 2 when he was faced with this rook d8 novelty in this position. He ended up taking a very long time and on his decision and playing bishop e2. And a very similar thing happened today in this position. Once again, he has the option of playing rook d1. He also here has the option, if he wants to, of castling long, both of which lead to interesting positions. I'm not prepared to, you know, give any kind of a definitive answer on how good this is for white or black. I didn't spend anywhere near enough time to really have a set opinion. But I will say that this is probably a very serious idea from Team Caruana. It doesn't appear to be only good for one game. It appears to be an actual very, very serious new approach to an old line. And I'm not sure white is better after either rook d1 or long castles. After rook d1, for instance, black has a choice between queen e7, which is very logical, or an even sort of more arrogant move, h7, h6, which completely stops bishop g5. And black is really not very afraid about any kind of play white can mount against the potential Isolani on d5. And after queen e7, black appears to be doing quite fine. And the same applies to long castles. After long castles, there is the move bishop d7, which black can make, and there is also a move queen e7, which doesn't appear to be bad either, leading to very unclear positions, because obviously white also makes a certain commitment when he castles queenside in these positions. And here white can play, for instance, king b1, and black once again has the obvious move rook d8, or h7, h6, once again just stopping bishop g5 and preparing maybe for e5, d4 under favorable circumstances. And it's a sharp position which is, I think, very, very unclear, and I would hesitate to pick a side here. Therefore, sort of with hindsight and having analyzed this for well, half an hour is nothing obviously here, but it does give you some kind of a taste of what the machine prefers here and what kind of moves the machine makes. I'm sorry. I have a better understanding why Magnus settled on bishop b2. Those positions are very, very unclear, and it's also, honestly, black probably is just fine. Therefore, making a move which is less committal and is generally just safer is quite understandable. But bishop e2 is clearly a bit of a cop-out for the very simple reason that it gives black an opportunity to take on c4, and the bishop will be taking on c4 in reply in 2 tempi from the e2 square instead of from the f1 square, which is a difference of a full tempo, obviously, compared to, let's say, the rook d1 lines. Black just played queen e7. Once again, here he could have tried for something sharp in the center, but clearly queen e7 is very much part of what he is planning in these positions. And here, Magnus played bishop g5. He could have started with rook d1, but here, once again, black has the move rook d8, which is perfectly serviceable, and black could also take on c4. It's notable that you can never play bishop d6 here because c takes b3 attacks the queen. So white takes back on c4, and black can play, for instance, bishop c7, and after bishop g5, h6, bishop h4. This is a very typical position, which it's important to note that black in many cases just completely ignores the quote-unquote threat of knight e4 and the quote-unquote worsening of his queenside after gf6. So the machine just plays bishop d7 here and says, neither of those two things worries me unduly. I don't mind you playing knight e4, and I don't mind this structural change, and says black is just fine. And after queen e7, bishop g5, FIDE went for similar positions, but they're arguably even simpler to equalize because there's no rook on d1 and there's fewer tactics. He took on c4. Magnus played knight d2. If you take on c4 in reply, I think black most likely just goes h6, bishop h4, knight e5, bishop e2. And here there is the immediate bishop knight g6, which is fine. But you can also just play bishop d7 here, as once again the computer demonstrates. Wait for a move. You probably want to play bishop c6 next as black, and if knight e4, you can quite safely play g5 in these types of positions. 92, although, made us slightly more excited during the live broadcast, because we had dreams of the game becoming quite sharp after knight e5 and something like knight c4. But the computer analysis shows that black really never has anything to worry here. Another notable thing to say here is that it feels very, very natural to start with h6, to once again, after bishop h4, always have the option of playing g7, g5. But Fabiano probably felt that it was more important to start with knight e5, because he's really not afraid of those knight e4 variations. And very importantly, he is just completely ruling out the knight c4, bishop takes c4 option for white, because queen c5 in reply attacks both of white bishops, and black is just immediately quite significantly better. So white can never really bail out in this position by taking on c4 with the knight. Magnus castled in reply. If he does go knight c4, the machine suggests that there really is no reason for any kind of panic whatsoever, because you can just play bishop d7 here. And if white castles, we get a position that also could have appeared on the next move. Black just goes bishop c6 and says this is very, very level. There's really nothing here at all to be scared of. And because of that, after bishop d7, the one move that maybe creates some problems is queen c3. And here, I suspect there are simpler ways to equalize, but I really liked what the machine gives in this position. The machine says you should take, because if black plays bishop c7, white can take on f6 and go bishop h4. And here the inclusion of the moves queen c3 and bishop c7 means that black cannot play knight g6 here, because the pawn on f6 is hanging. And this position actually the machine considers to be very playable for white. But knight takes e4, knight takes e4 and f6. The machine quite likes for black, but the reason it likes it for black is quite spectacular. After queen takes e5, I'm not convinced it's the only move, but it's the most spectacular move for sure, and I wanted to show it to you. Instead of trying to recapture some material immediately, the machine goes bishop c6, bishop takes c4. White is currently a full piece up, which is kind of noteworthy. And the machine makes another quiet move and just goes rook a e8. And I think if white does nothing in the center, the next move machine makes is bishop c7 and starts chasing this queen around. And this apparently is just completely equal. You know, by this point we're all sort of used to these incredibly weird looking machine lines, but sometimes you still run into positions like this, which you feel it's worth spending a minute showing to the audience because of how well, slightly outlandish it looks. But as I said, Magnus castled, black just played bishop d7. And now it's sort of time to simplify, because as mentioned, knight c4, bishop c6, black doesn't experience any difficulties here whatsoever. Which is why Magnus played bishop f4, knight g6, bishop g3. And here FIDE took no time at all to play bishop c6, knight c4, bishop c7. And here I think it was at this point that Alexander Grishuk started asking us about Georgian food. Because we felt that the game, extremely likely that the game is really about to get just completely fizzle out, because white really has no claim to an advantage even here. And the open d file is a clear invitation to just start trading everything off. And the next couple of moves didn't really disabuse us of that notion. Magnus played rook f d1 quite quickly as well. And also something I think that we noted during these live transmissions is that when Magnus starts playing almost instantaneously, it generally is a little bit of a tell that he doesn't believe his position is anything much. But whenever he feels that he actually is in with a shout to win a game, this is where he starts tanking, because he feels that the price of the move is very high and he doesn't want to make a poor decision. So rook fd1, rook d8, rook d8, rook d8, and rook d1 was played very quickly. Fabiano took on d1 and played knight d5, which is also very sensible. Queen d4, knight c3, queen c3. And here, well, the eventual outcomes did not really prove us correct, but we felt that the next couple of decisions by Fabiano were frankly somewhat strange, because black can play something like bishop b5 here, either immediately or after taking on g3, but in particular just immediately. And the idea is to take on g3 and then play queen c7. But in more general terms, black is aiming for something like I don't know, white makes a move of some sort, and we take on g3, we play queen c7, and we pretty much just take on c4 and go knight e7. And both me and Alexander Grishuk live on the air were arguing that the moment you get this exact material situation on the board, 6 against 6 with no weaknesses, and this light squared bishop against this knight, the game is more or less effectively over, because white never really makes any progress whatsoever. And in general, I think it's very well understood that queen and knight are better than queen and bishop, because they just coordinate better, and this is the type of a material balance that black should be aiming for. Whereas Fabiano actually started thinking here, and he took on g3, and in this position, once again, you can play bishop b5, but he played queen d7, and after bishop d3, here he had an amusing way to make an immediate draw, which was kind of funny. He could have played bishop b4 here, and there is a very nice tactical shot here, knight e5. Obviously, the idea of bishop b4 is to offer a draw via this perpetual. But after bishop e4, there is this very nice tactical shot, knight e5, which means that after knight takes e5, queen takes e5, the bishop is hanging, and also there is mate on b8 after any recapture on d3. But the computer says that you can play f7, f5 here, and it's just an immediate equality, because once again, we've prevented mate, and if white takes on e4, obviously the same perpetual still holds. But Fabi continued sort of ignoring the one idea white appears to have in this position. He played b6, Magnus played f3, he played bishop b7. And Magnus immediately takes on g6 and plays e4. And this brings us back to this argument that you can definitely make for queen and knight being better than queen and bishop. And Magnus was, I feel, extremely happy about this simplification, because it gives you at least some hopes of maybe pushing g4, g5, or pushing e5 and playing knight d6. And if you allow some of these things, you could actually find yourself in some hot water. Maybe not a lot, but some hot water. But of course, the solidity and the symmetrical structure of the position is still such that it will take a while for black to actually become worse. And Fabi made a number of, well, not difficult, but still precise moves to completely diffuse white's initiative here. He played queen c7, and here Magnus spent no time at all playing e5. We were also, during the live show, interested in the endgame after g4, bishop a6, knight e5, black takes, but now there's a threat of knight c6, and also it's not that easy to play f6 because the pawn will be hanging. But black can play bishop b5, g5, king f8, king f2, king e7, king e3, and now there's this maneuver bishop e8, finally forcing f6. And on air, I wasn't entirely sure just how equal this was, but the computer seems to be completely unafraid here with black, so I guess the answer is very, very equal. But also after g4, black has an additional option of playing f7, f6, and if white goes g5, it just turns out to be a blunder of a full pawn because of queen c5 check. So Magnus goes e5, and here Fabi played bishop a6, sorry, queen c5 check. It's actually an important move because it forces white to play king h2, which is more or less the only move if you want to plant the knight on d6. And now bishop a6, takes, and f6, f4, king f8. And obviously it's very, very beneficial for black to have forced white to play king h2, and now the king has to take a lot longer to return to the fray. Magnus ends up playing king g1 here. We tried making something like g4, king e7, and king g3 work during the live show, but the move I suggested here, which is g6, g5, appears to be very, very serviceable. And after king f3, there's, you know, any number of equalities that the computer provides for black. Even the simplest one, taking, giving g5 check, and then after king e4, attacking the pawn on g4 seems to be very, very sufficient to make a draw. Magnus played king g1, king e7, king f2, king d6, and this was the final actual turning point we were mildly interested for a while in c3, c4 here, trying to lock the bishop down on a6. But it turns out that after king c6, king e3, it's not the only equality black has, but it's, I think, the most direct one. You can play king c5, king d3. Now e takes f6 is a serious threat, followed by knight e4 check and knight takes f6. But black can just play f5, king c3 and b5. And the bishop eventually breaks free. And white is not worse, but he is also not better. And the machine once again shows any number of ideas which lead to immediate equality here, but no advantage for either side. And Magnus spent some time, I think, considering those variations. It took him a while to make his next move. But he eventually settled on king e3, which is basically a draw offer after bishop f1, king f2, bishop a6. And they had indeed repeated those moves. And after 40th king f2, the game was agreed drawn. What to say about this game? The trend continues of Fabiano just consistently out-preparing Magnus with the black pieces. The same possibly can be said about the black games, I mean Magnus's black games, and black in general is doing exceptionally well in the match so far. There was only one game, which is game 3, in which Fabiano got something out of the opening with the white pieces. But somewhat surprisingly, clearly Team Magnus had a week to work on this 92 move, and yet the reply of queen d8 followed by bishop d6 appears to have taken Magnus by significant surprise, which is, once again, it is an exceedingly rare line, but it's also 3-ply away from the move that was quite clearly prepared for a while. So some questions can be raised about this particular little bit of opening preparation, but not a lot really you can say from the outside about why this game happened the way it happened. The fact remains that the score is still level after 7 games. The 2 white games Magnus had in a row in game 6 and 7 didn't really yield him anything, and he actually came close to losing game 6, so that clearly is very welcome news for Fabiano, who now has 5 whites and 3 whites and 2 blacks in the remaining 5 games. And arguably the playing, sort of the initiative in the match belongs to him, because he once again completely diffused any ideas that Magnus may have had. Game 8, in which Fabiano will be, it will be his turn to try and achieve something with the white pieces, starts tomorrow, Monday, same time. So make sure to tune in to watch our live broadcast, starting at the same time, 4 p.m. Central European. Thanks for watching. This has been Peter Svidler for Chess24 with the recap of Game 7 of the title match in London.